I liken that to allegro monontro... I can't talk today. Hey YouTube, it's Cello Ben. Great to see you. How's everybody doing? I know we're still in the thick of a wild, wild year to say the least, but I hope that everybody's staying safe and healthy. Today, I'm going to talk about something that plagues a lot of young musicians in the United States, which is the knowledge gap when it comes to German musical terms. So many of us start out learning some Italian terms. Largo, allegro, andante, adagio, lento. These are pretty elementary in standard classical training. But later on, we're bound to encounter loads of German and French terms in our musical endeavors. I'm not going to deal with French here, in part because my French pronunciation is just horrific, but I do want to give you a rundown of some important German terms that you are more than likely to encounter if you're pursuing a career in quote-unquote classical music. So let's get started. Knowing these terms can give you a really big edge. I've seen on more than one occasion when playing in an orchestra or something with my fellow students, either the conductor or maybe even a coach will ask the orchestra, what does this German word mean? And there'll be crickets in the ensemble. Nobody will know. And that'll be often followed by a lecture from the conductor or the coach talking about how important it is to go into every rehearsal knowing what all of the terms mean. Which, they're right about that. We want to know what the music is saying when we're going to be playing it. So with that being said, let's look at a few German terms so that you can have a leg up by knowing how to decipher them once it's time to go back to rehearsals when it's safe to do so again. We'll go through some markings that are mostly encountered in string music, and then we'll go through some things like tempo and character markings that are more widely applicable. And after that, we'll go over the major German instrument names that you're most likely to see in an orchestral score. Let's start with the string-specific terms. First up, the mute. As you may know, in Italian it's con sordino when you're supposed to use the mute, and senza sordino when the mute is no longer to be used. And in German we have mit Dämpfer for when you're supposed to use the mute, and ohne Dämpfer when the mute is to be taken off. If you're a native English speaker, you'll likely be able to spot clues in a lot of German words that help you out, and this is no exception, because to me at least, Dämpfer sounds like damper, something that dampens the sound. So, mute on, mit Dämpfer. Mute off, ohne Dämpfer. We have more of these sorts of pairings that we'll see too. How about this one? In Italian, you may see sul ponticello and sul tasto. So for sul ponticello, you're riding the bridge and getting that chalkboard, scratchy, otherworldly sound. And for sul tasto, you're heading up to the fingerboard and getting a much more ethereal and wispy tone color. Both are super important effects that you're bound to see a lot, especially in the 20th century and beyond. So, what are they in German? Well, for playing on the bridge, you'll see am Steg. Steg is bridge, and am is just a contraction of an dem, on the bridge. Simple enough. So, am Steg, on the bridge. And for the fingerboard, am Griffbrett. An dem Griffbrett, shortened to am Griffbrett. So Griffbrett can actually literally be translated to handleboard or grasping board. The grasping part evokes a little bit too much tension in my mind, because if you know me as a teacher, you'll know that I'm all about no tension. But nevertheless, those are just a couple of the literal translations that can be gotten from it. Brett on its own is the word for board. And I know this in part because when I was in German class in grad school, we happened to learn the word Waschbrettbauch, literally washboard abdomen. That's right, it's the same literal translation between English and German. Waschbrettbauch and washboard abs. I think that that's really, really cool. Anyway, time for a fun one. Playing at the frog. Sometimes composers will tell us where in the bow they want us to play. And for frog, they say am Frosch. And that's another one of those really literal translations. It's the short form of an dem Frosch. On the frog, or at the frog. I guess it wouldn't be on the frog, probably, because you're not going to be bowing with that part of the whatever. At the frog, am Frosch. Because besides on, the word an can mean at. And conversely, if the composer wants you at the tip, they may say an der Spitze, at the tip. You may also see some really specific instructions for collegno bowing, which tells us in Italian to use the sticks of our bows to make sound, with the wood, literally. You will often see this in music from the Second Viennese school, like in Berg. In my experiences with his music, he marks the words collegno in Italian, but then he gives one of two qualifiers, geschlagen or gestrichen. Geschlagen literally means hit, and this is an all-wood stroke that's very pointy, if that's the right word. Very, very vertical. And gestrichen basically means drawn or stroked in this context. So geschlagen is going to be very percussive, a literal hitting motion. Very important to be careful not to hurt your bow when you're doing collegno geschlagen, especially. And gestrichen, the way that I've been instructed to do it in the past, in Berg at least, has been to draw the wood of the bow across the string and also let a little bit of bow hair in there too, so that you get kind of a combo. That may be a matter of interpretation, though, depending on the composer, the conductor, the coach, the work, all of that stuff. So, never hurts to ask. Just say something like, I learned from Cello Ben that gestrichen, in his experience, can mean pulling the bow with the wood and letting a little bit of hair in there. But I know it can be different depending on whom you ask. So, what do you think? Anyway, just a few more things that I want to say in the string department here. The term for a string is Saite, and you may see that throughout a piece of music, especially when preceded by a number or Roman numeral. Now, do not overthink this. It's just telling you what string to play on. You may already know, if you're a violinist, for example, that seeing a Roman numeral 3 means to play on your D string, and if you're a cellist, seeing Roman numeral 4 will mean you execute the passage on your C string. It just goes from the top down. So on cello, A is 1, D is 2, G is 3, C is 4, etc. And it works the same for other bowed string instruments. So it also works exactly the same when you see a number or a Roman numeral, and then the word Saite. Now, another important thing that we do in the string world is play harmonics. You may see them marked as flageolet. Now, this is taken from French, but it's all over German scores and parts, and it's definitely important to know. You may see it abbreviated FLAG. So how about Davisi? That's a big one. Especially in orchestral string playing, Davisi is a super important concept that's used by all manner of composers to get various different effects or to make things a little bit easier for individual players or anything like that. In Italian, it tends to be a bit simpler than in German. In Italian, you'll likely see Davisi A followed by a number, which means you divide that passage into X many parts. In German, though, here's how it works. The word geteilt means divided. Geteilt. But you will often see a composer be very specific about how they want it divided. For that, you'll often see a written out number followed by Fach. So, let's start by just counting to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the spelled out number and then Fach, F-A-C-H, is what you're going to be most likely to see in Davisi parts that are written in German. And then that'll likely be followed by geteilt. Let's take a look at this example from Strauss's Don Juan. It's a 4-part Davisi, and Strauss marks it as vierfach geteilt, just as we expected. Now, sometimes a composer will want different stands to play different things, and for that, they will most likely use the word Pult if they're using German, and it typically comes along with a numeral. No big deal. So if you see the number 5 followed by the word Pult, then if you're on 5th stand, you'd best be ready to play. You may also see something marked Die Hälfte. This means literally the half. Make sure to ask the principal how they prefer to do this, or if you are the principal, ask the conductor or coach. Because some folks will want to do it with inside and outside players, or some may prefer to do it with just the front or just the back cello, or whatever string instrument you play. I don't want to exclude anybody else here. Cool. So now that we've dealt with a bunch of string business, let's go over some more general musical terms for tempo and character. For this, I'm often going to compare them to Italian musical terms, because that's, what I grew up on and what is likely a similar case for many of you. Not all of them will necessarily translate exactly, but they should still help to give you an idea of what the composer is looking for. So, first order of business, how do we say tempo in German? Sometimes even in German, a composer will still just say tempo, but oftentimes they will say Zeitmaß. Zeitmaß, which literally means time measurement. I love that word so much. And, like you may see tempo primo in Italian when you're to return to the starting tempo, in German you will likely see erstes Zeitmaß, first tempo. Now for a practical example, I'm going to use Strauss's spectacular tone poem Don Quixote. Right at the beginning here he writes mäßiges Zeitmaß, a moderate tempo. So in my mind, I always equate mäßig with moderato. Now, the third letter in mäßig here may look a little bit strange to you. This is known as an SZ, and it basically just takes the place of a double S in the cases where it's used. So that is pronounced mäßig, which is similar to moderato. What about the Italian l'istesso tempo, the same tempo, where maybe you're starting a new section but the composer doesn't want you to change the speed or character? Well, German has a similar thing. Dasselbe Zeitmaß. However, the two most important things there are selb and Zeitmaß. The first word can appear differently depending on the grammar, so don't sweat it. Just remember that the word part selb followed by Zeitmaß or tempo means to keep the same tempo. Let's take a look at some other tempi. Schnell and rasch. These both mean fast, but I differentiate them in my mind a little bit at least. I like to think of schnell like allegro, and rasch like presto. So, schnell and rasch, both fast tempi. And perhaps if a composer wants a more allegretto-like tempo, they'll say etwas schnell, somewhat fast, or nicht zu schnell, not too fast. I liken that to allegro ma non troppo. Or for a decently fast tempo, a composer might choose the German word for moving, bewegt. Bewegt. So what about on the slower side? For that, we turn to langsam. Langsam means slow, and I liken it to adagio. Now, maybe the composer wants it sort of slow, but not too much. Like before, how about etwas langsam? Somewhat slow, or nicht so langsam, not too slow. How about nicht schleppend? Nicht, as in nicht so schnell, negates what comes after it. It's not, but in German. Schleppend means dragging, so nicht so schleppend means not dragging. And on the other side, we have nicht eilen, which is no rushing. Nicht eilen. Like in Italian, German tempo markings are not necessarily just going to be about speed. Character often plays a big role too. For example, lebhaft, literally life-having, but lively. You'll find these character markings all over the place in German music. I've gone into Mahler's Fifth Symphony and the cello part for some examples to share with you today. For example, klagend, lamenting or sorrowful. Klagend, or breit, meaning broad or wide. You'll sometimes see that in a tempo marking talking about a broad tempo, but you also may see it in terms of the bow, breit gestrichen. Now, aside from more static tempo terms, German music is often filled with terms that describe something that's to happen gradually. Kind of like how in Italian we have accelerando, decrescendo, ritardando. So as an example, again in Mahler 5, we have steigernd, increasing. Steigernd. And there's also one of my personal favorites, zurückhaltend, holding back. Zurückhaltend. Now for the one that's always confused me, drängend. That means urgent or pressing. But on the page, it always makes me think of dragging, so I've had to sort of unlearn that habit and make sure that even though I see something that looks like dragging in that case, I'm going forward as required. Because in reality, it's quite the opposite of what it looks like to a native English speaker, at least based on my personal experience. So, last thing before we get to the instrument names, a few important words that'll make their way into all kinds of markings. Wieder, which means again. Noch, which means still or even, as in noch langsamer, or even slower. Immer means always, like Italian's sempre. We've covered etwas, meaning somewhat, and there's also bedeutend, which means significantly. So we can have something that's somewhat faster, etwas schneller, or significantly faster, bedeutend schneller. How about plötzlich? Suddenly, like subito in Italian. Plötzlich. Now, you already heard this when I talked about mutes, but mit means with, and ohne means without. When you see these words, pay most of your attention to the main part of the words that come afterwards. Mit and ohne are members of different grammatical cases in German, which is way beyond the scope of this video, but what it mostly means in a practical sense is that occasionally you may see different endings to words that follow than what you're used to. Don't worry, that's just the grammar talking, and the root, the substance of those words, is really what's important. So, mit is with, and ohne is without. There's also viel. This means much or a lot. Viel Bogen means lots of bow. So viel, a lot, and Bogen, bow. Lots of bow, so nice big bow strokes. Also, I should probably know from 15 years as a cellist that this is not how you draw a bow, but I'll deal with that another time. Have you had enough of these yet? There are plenty more of these, of course, but I think we should move on to the instrument names that I mentioned. Some of these are going to be very similar to what you see in English, and if you're an English speaker, you will likely have no trouble deciphering the majority of them. Especially in the strings, the only major difference that you'll always see in a German-marked score is Bratsche, which is the German term for viola. However, sometimes an alternative name for violin will be used, Geige. This can be thought of as being more like a fiddle, but in practice, the terms seem to often be used interchangeably, Violine and Geige. For bass, you may see Kontrabass, and for harp, you'll see Harfe. Now in the wind section, you have Flöte, plural Flöten, that's the flute, and then oboe and oboen, oboes. Now the oboe's counterpart, the English horn, is simply English horn. Clarinet is also nice and similar to English. Klarinette, Klarinetten. Bassoon is the wind instrument that's most different, Fagott. It's similar to the Italian fagotto, and the plural in German of Fagott is Fagotte. How about brass? Well, we have Trompete, trumpet, and the plural is Trompeten. And then something a bit different for trombone, Posaune. Posaune, and the plural is Posaunen. Tuba, tuba. So that's nice and simple for the English speakers out there. And the plural is Tuben. Tuben. Now for the horns. Like with tuba, the singular is very easy if you're already an English speaker. Horn. The plural is a little bit different though. Take a look at this word. It looks like it could be Horner, but those two dots over the O, known as an umlaut, change the pronunciation. So instead of Horner, it's Hörner. Piano is Klavier, though some will use the term Flügel to describe a grand piano specifically, but really Klavier is the main one that you need to know. And now to the percussion section. The general name for orchestral percussion is great. Schlagzeug. Schlagzeug. Now drum is Trommel. Trommel. And within that Trommel category, we have kleine Trommel, snare drum, and große Trommel, bass drum. And timpani are Pauken. Pauken. How about cymbals? Becken. Becken. And the tam-tam is tam-tam. Of course, there are countless other percussion instruments that are used in orchestras, but that's way too long of a list for me to go into here, unfortunately. So I leave that to you to do some research when you're going to be using some other percussion instruments besides what I've mentioned here. Or, even better, when you just feel like learning more. Wow, we have gone through a lot of terms. Now, this is by no means comprehensive. German is a rich and complex language with innumerable descriptive terms therein. So I encourage you to be diligent whenever you see a marking in music that you don't understand, regardless of the language. Look it up and commit it to memory. You'll thank me later, and your coaches, teachers, conductors, and colleagues will thank you. And if you want to learn more German terms in music, head over to IMSLP and do some browsing. Look through some music and see what other terms you can dig up. And please do post your findings in the comments section below. Sometimes you may find that there's some ambiguity when you're trying to translate a word or a phrase, so if that happens, just let me know in the comments and I'll try to get you an answer. Anyway, that's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please shift into thumb position and hit that like button. And if you want to be notified whenever a new Cello Ben video comes out on YouTube, please click that subscribe button and then hit the bell for notifications. And if you want to connect on Instagram, hit the follow button for @cello_Ben. Anyway, thanks again for watching. I hope you all stay safe and healthy, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Tschüss!